Many times I'm asked what part I think Khe Sanh will play in the history of our country, and it's almost impossible for me to evaluate it since I was so close to the situation. However, I can tell you a little bit about it, and perhaps the place we should start is with an orientation of its location and some of the features around it. Khe Sanh, as you know, is located 8 to 10 miles from the Sapone River, which is the boundary between Laos and South Vietnam. It's south of the demilitarized zone and has around it certain hill masses which control some of the infiltration routes coming down in this general area. And of course, Route 9, basically the only road in this area, runs from the Laotian border, continues on through and goes almost to the coast of Vietnam. In about April of 1967, the battalion surprised an enemy element on this particular hill mass, and eventually it resulted in the Marines seizing Hill 861, 881 South, and 881 North. After these had been seized, it was determined that a small unit should be placed on Hill 950 in this general area here, so that when August of 1967 rolled around and I took over the base, I found myself with troops on 881 South, 861, and 950.
On January 31st, 1968, a massive wave of NVA and VC attacks swept throughout South Vietnam, everywhere that is, except Khe Sanh. The launching of the largest enemy offensive thus far in the conflict did not shift Westmoreland's focus away from Khe Sanh. A press release prepared on the following day at the height of Tet showed that Westmoreland was not about to be distracted. The enemy, said Westmoreland, is attempting to confuse the issue. Let me caution everyone not to be confused. In the days before Tet, the Marine base at Khe Sanh assumed a misleading symbolism. Like Dien Bien Phu, it was another mountain base. It was the closest to North Vietnam and manned by an elite fighting force.
Khe Sanh was an important outpost. If the enemy had taken this outpost, I think the province of Quang Tri and the DMZ area would have been in jeopardy. The enemy had planned to take it as part of his Tet offensive. At the same time, he had planned to overrun Quang Tri City, seize and hold Hue, and to roll up our defenses south of the demilitarized zone. If he could have seized that plateau, he could have run trucks with ammunition, logistics, and even conventional artillery into the Khe Sanh plateau, and circulation further to the east could have been made untenable. Now, we saw the enemy building up his forces in order to siege and eventually overrun Khe Sanh as he did Dien Bien Phu in 1954.
In Hanoi, General Giap had counted on the similarity to panic Westmoreland into draining troops away from Saigon and giving the Viet Cong forces a better chance there. President Johnson was so alarmed about Khe Sanh that he had General Maxwell Taylor set up a special White House Situation Room with an immense aerial photograph of the base so the president could keep track of all troop movements. Johnson was suspicious of Westmoreland's assurance that the base could be held. He demanded that the Joint Chiefs submit a written endorsement of Westmoreland's position. On February 2nd, Westmoreland received a cable stating that Johnson was afraid that Khe Sanh might be so imperiled that he could be confronted with the decision to use tactical nuclear weapons to redress the balance. Westmoreland's reply was hardly encouraging. B-52s and America's other weapons would prevent another Dien Bien Phu, he said. But looking over the entire northern I Corps area, a massive North Vietnamese attack across the DMZ would change the equation dramatically. Under such circumstances, Westmoreland added, I visualized that either tactical nuclear weapons or chemical agents would be active candidates for employment. In spite of the risk, Westmoreland had made his decision. The Marines would stay and fight. bunkers and hidden under the tree foliage covered the surrounding slopes, was the largest and best equipped force ever mustered by the enemy. At Khe Sanh itself, 3 North Vietnamese divisions had pinned down the 5 U.S. Marine battalions, a battalion of South Vietnamese Rangers, and a handful of Air Force and CB support troops. But the NVA forces were themselves taking heavy casualties during their siege. Whatever Johnson might fear, Giap's focus from the first salvo in early January remained centered on the Tet Offensive. The NVA had cut Highway 9, the road from Khe Sanh to the coast, and all supplies had to be brought in by air. The Marines called their airstrip the H-Zone, which stood for HIT. Clarence Smith remembers flying supplies to the mountain base.
One of the major bases that we supported was Khe Sanh, and you've probably heard of Khe Sanh. It was up in the mountains, and if I remember right, one of the key hills that overlooked Khe Sanh was 851, and I can recall going up to Khe Sanh. They had a runway there that a C-130 on. And that's the way they resupplied the people in the Khe Sanh area, and also resupplied the Marines in the outlying mountains around Khe Sanh.
They flew low through heavy clouds, skirting the mountains and ducking NVA ground fire.
And as I was on my final approach to the landing strip, my engine quit, and I only had one way to go, and that was down, and luckily I managed to get to the runway before I crash landed.
That was not Smith's only near disaster at Khe Sanh.
And I flew around for over 2 hours trying to find a hole big enough to get into a landing strip up on 851. And we had no lighting at all. All they'd have is a flashlight or something that they could motion in the air that was them. And we flew around for 2.5 hours. My fuel was going down on the aircraft, and I finally told them, well, I've got to leave because I'm going to run out of gas. And so we went back toward Quang Tri, but in doing so, there was another old airstrip on the way down that was closer to the DMZ than where we were. And so I knew there was a refueling facility at that airstrip. So I was, flying around coming out of Khe Sanh. I was probably at 3,000 feet or 3,500 feet, and I could see ahead that there was a light indicating this other runway. And so we made an approach. The 2 aircraft came in together and made an approach to that runway. And just as I was coming in to touch down, my engine quit again. And I just held what I had, and I came in and landed and coasted down the runway. We didn't have any power, so there was 2 times in my little tour of duty over there that I got a little bit concerned about what was going on. And luckily, I made it out of both of them.
The NVA were knocking out so many aircraft that the Marines had to set up a bunker for medics who had to pull wounded men from the burning planes. The area around the bunker was called Downtown. The Communists already occupied the town of Khe Sanh, 3 miles south of the base, and had overrun a U.S. Special Forces camp at Lang Vei to the west. The North Vietnamese had been clever. The buildup of forces and ensuing attack on the remote base at Khe Sanh was, in large measure, a diversion for the Tet Offensive. While Khe Sanh was strategically useful, most of its value laid in its ability to keep American aircraft preoccupied while North Vietnamese forces conducted their vast offensive elsewhere. The Marine Direct Air Support Center, located at the combat base, was responsible for the coordination of airstrikes with artillery fire. An airborne battlefield command and control center in the form of a C-130 aircraft directed incoming strike aircraft to forward air control spotter planes, which in turn directed them to targets either located by them or radioed in by ground units.
It was our commanding officer's birthday, and we were having a party for him in the officers club. And the call came in. The hot pad, the weather was terrible, and the hot pad was shut down. And the call came in as we need 2 planes to go up to the DMZ, that a Marine patrol has been ambushed, and a helicopter's gone in to get them out, get the wounded out, and it's been shot down, and another helicopter's gone in to get that one out, and it's been shot down. So we've got 2 helicopters, 2 crews, and a patrol in the DMZ, surrounded by a superior force of North Vietnamese and Viet Cong troops, and they called for volunteers. So myself and a buddy volunteered to go up there, and we went to the other side. We got in the planes as quick as we could, and we got up there, and it was a mess. It was thunderstorms, and it was in the mountains, and you couldn't see. You could only see the mountains when the lightning flashed. And you know, they shot up some flares, and the flares really didn't shoot up flares. There was a C-130, I think, flying around, telling us, or a DC-3, trying to direct us to where the helicopters were, but you could only see little glimpses of them on the ground through the clouds.
From the cockpit of his F-4, Northcutt was trying to sort out what was going on below.
And we're circling and trying to get a bead on where everybody was. And to make a long story short, we made, when there's hostile fire, you're supposed to make 1 run and get out of there, so as not to risk the airplane. But we made 4 or 5 runs because we didn't want to drop all our ordnance in 1 run and have it not be in the right spot and not be able to adjust and go back and get it where it needed to be.
After dropping his load on target, Northcutt headed back to base to reload for another run.
So we made 4 or 5 runs and went back to Da Nang. There was another flight of 2 planes right behind us. We got back, got in 2 more airplanes, went back up, and I guess there were 4 flights of 2 that went up, and we came back.
Thus began what many considered the most concentrated application of aerial firepower in the history of warfare. On an average day, 350 tactical fighter bombers, 60 B-52s, and 30 light observation or reconnaissance aircraft operated in the skies near the base.
In early February, the enemy again tried to take the H-61 complex. However, this time they made an effort on its twin sister H-61A. The attack on that hill was repelled through the use of not only the supporting arms, artillery air, but also, as with every other attack on the perimeter, by the organic infantry weapons, the 81 millimeter mortars, 3.5 rockets, M79, machine guns, and mines, and every other weapon available to an infantry battalion.
On February 10th, the North Vietnamese Communist Party newspaper boasted that the U.S. faced a defeat as disastrous as that suffered by the French at Dien Bien Phu. There was growing concern over the fate of the Marine garrison, as the American press also believed that the end was near for the Marines. At stake now was more than a key military stronghold. The Communists were out to inflict heavy casualties, hoping to shock the Americans to the negotiating table. Inside the camp, the Marines' names for the enemy grew increasingly respectful. No longer did they call the enemy VC, but Victor Charlie or Mr. Charlie. These Marine grunts knew well enough from the siege to call him simply Vic. On February 23rd, Khe Sanh received its worst bombardment of the entire battle. During one 8-hour period, over 1,000 North Vietnamese rounds found a final resting place on the ground of the Marine base camp. That same day, a patrol from Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 26th Marines, was ambushed by an NVA force estimated at battalion size.
The first day I got hit, we were up around, I think it was Mudder's Ridge or Dong Ha Mountain, and we had walked into what's called a horseshoe ambush. If you can just imagine, it's like you're holding a big U shape. Well, we had gone into it. The whole company had gone into it. So this was a huge, NVA had a huge one. And they were just wailing the shit out of us. And I can remember, we set our guns up, the 81s up, we set our guns up, and I was looking down line, and I can vividly remember my gunnery sergeant was a big man, and I thought he was ancient. He must have been 31 at the time, big guy. And he was pointing at us, screaming, and I saw it was like a black cloud. And all of a sudden, he was gone. That was it. He got hit directly on the head with a mortar round. When we shot 81s and 81s and 61s, and they shot 60s and 82s. Everything that we had would fit in their tubes. Nothing that they had would fit in our tubes. I might got the numbers backwards. But when he got hit, I went like this, and I got hit in both elbows and went through both elbows and blew me backwards and killed all of them. We lost about 8 or 9 guys. Well, that night, we got hit several times during the night. And I can remember, we had infantry companies out in front of us to protect us because we had the mortars. Heavy machine gun fire all the night. Heavy, I'm sure there was some hand-to-hand on the front line there. But every once in a while, it'd be quiet. We wouldn't hear as many machine guns. And the next morning is when they medevaced me out, and there was a guy that I had gone to school with named Charlie Coleman. And Charlie was a bright, red-headed kid. We all played in a band together. He played, and he ran track at Atherton. But Charlie was a machine gunner. And I didn't know Charlie was in X Company, Kilo Company. So in Kilo Company, who was designated to protect us. Well, Charlie got killed by a sniper. And they're medevacing me out, and right next to me is Charlie's body bag. And they tagged him, and they had a name on it. And I saw that name, and it didn't dawn on me. It was Coleman, Coleman. And it didn't dawn on me until after I got home, that his family contacted him and told us, Charlie got killed. And he got hit on the same day. In fact, that night that I got hit, he got killed. He was trying to protect us, and he got killed. And when they were flying us out on the choppers, and there again, you try to get a little humor out of something. They always taught us when we fly on choppers to set on your helmet because they'll shoot up through the choppers. I did, Joe didn't. Joe got hit too when I got hit. And he got shot in the butt 3 times.
The operational plan for what was to become the largest operation launched by the 3rd MAF thus far in the conflict was simple. The 2nd Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment, and the 2nd Battalion, 3rd Marine Regiment would set out from Landing Zone Stud at Ka Lu, east of Khe Sanh, and head down Route 9, while elements of the 1st Air Cavalry leapfrogged by helicopter down the road, air assaulting onto key terrain features to cover the Marine advance. General Westmoreland's planned relief effort infuriated the Marines, who had not wanted to hold Khe Sanh in the first place. The Marines had constantly argued that technically Khe Sanh had never been under siege, since it had never truly been isolated from resupply or reinforcement. Opposition from the North Vietnamese was light. The primary problem that hampered the advance was heavy morning cloud cover that slowed the pace of helicopter operations. As the relief force made progress, the Marines at Khe Sanh moved out from their positions and began patrolling at greater distances from the base. Things heated up for the air cavalrymen on April 6th, when the 3rd Brigade encountered an NVA blocking force and fought a day-long engagement. On the following day, the 2nd Brigade of the 1st Air Cavalry captured the old French fort near Khe Sanh village after a 3-day battle. The link-up between the relief force and the Marines at KSCB took place at 8 o'clock on April 8th, when the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry, entered the camp. The 11th Engineers proclaimed Route 9 open to traffic on April 11th. On April 15, 1968, Operation Pegasus was officially terminated. Colonel Lowndes and the 26th Marines departed Khe Sanh, leaving the defense of the base to the 1st Marine Regiment. General Westmoreland continued to demand that the base be occupied and that more troops should be sent to keep the pressure on the enemy. No matter what Westmoreland was saying, Tet had been a serious setback for the United States. North Vietnam and the Viet Cong had taken heavy losses, but Tet made the war a new ballgame. Just 2 months after the relief of Khe Sanh, Westmoreland was sent home. He was replaced by General Creighton Abrams. On March 31st, Tet claimed its last casualty. Speaking from the Oval Office, President Johnson announced that in order to de-escalate the war, he was stopping all bombing of North Vietnam except in an area above the DMZ. With the hope for world peace in the balance, Johnson said he did not want to devote 1 hour of the coming days to partisan causes. He therefore would not seek another term as president. It was now to be another commander-in-chief's war. 1 week after taking command, Abrams ordered the initiation of Operation Charlie, the destruction and evacuation of Khe Sanh. Once the news of the closure of the Khe Sanh combat base was announced, the American media immediately raised questions about the reasoning behind its abandonment. If Khe Sanh had been so strategically important in January, why was it not so in July? The explanation given out by the Saigon Command was that the enemy had changed his tactics and that the Marines now had enough troops and helicopters to carry out mobile operations, that a fixed base was no longer necessary. By this point in the conflict, however, the Marines' demand for more mobility was moot. The gradual withdrawal of U.S. forces had begun. U.S. military participation in the war would soon be relegated to a defensive stance. For the Marines who fought there, Khe Sanh was a pivotal point in the war and in their lives.
Most of us were, I was, like I said, going on 18, and the rest of them were 19. We were just young kids, and we did the best we could with what we had. We did the best we could in the worst situations that we had.